My guest today for IPMO's In Conversation with is the internationally renowned mediator Ken Cloke. So, I understand you began your academic journey at the University of California, Berkeley, where you were deeply involved in the civil rights movement. You worked as an administrative law judge for the California Agricultural Labor Relations Board and then a judge pro tem for the Superior Court of Los Angeles. You have a Juris Doctorate, a PhD in history, an LLM, and you've gone on to lecture, as far as I understand, in several law schools, including Harvard and Pepperdine University. In the 1980s, your career shifted to mediation. You set up the Center for Dispute Resolution in Santa Monica, California. And over the last 4 decades, you've established yourself as a leader in the field of conflict resolution, mediating thousands of disputes around the world and authoring numerous influential books on the subjects, including Mediating Dangerously, one of my favorite books, The Crossroads of Conflict, The Dance of the Opposites. And your most recent work, described as your magnum opus, is The Magic in Mediation, a search for symmetries, metaphors, and scale-free practices, published in 2023. In 2006, you co-founded Mediators Beyond Borders International and served as its first president, aiming to build local skills for peace and address systemic conflicts worldwide. We are honored to speak to you today. Okay. Did I get anything wrong in my introduction, or is that okay?
Sounds perfect. Thank you, Shane.
Okay. So, one of the things that interested me, and there's many, but I started off as an engineer and then I became a mediator, right? So I was a hard engineer, telecoms engineer, that sort of thing. And one of the things that I was reading about your career is the move from law and adjudication into mediation. Was there a moment when you thought, this is a calling, this is something for me, this is something I'm compelled to do?
Yes, absolutely. I was working as an attorney for a period of time, mostly during the 1960s, as a lawyer for the various political movements that were taking place at that time.
Yeah.
The civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the student movement, peace movement. And then I became a law professor and then a judge. And while I was sitting as a judge, I had the first inkling that this would be a much better way of practicing. I remember thinking that I was supposed to be doing justice,
Yeah.
and I had no idea what that was. And I didn't know how to get there using the law. And then I was assigned as a judge to settle cases and found that I enjoyed it and it was much more interesting and more fun. The second kind of advance in that realization came when I was asked to be on television as the first judge in People's Court.
Okay.
Judge Wapner succeeded me, and we had a demonstration. We taped the pilot, and without really thinking about it, I mediated the issue that was in front of me, and they fired me because they wanted somebody to lose so they could interview them afterwards. And I remember thinking that there was really something wrong with this, but I wasn't entirely sure exactly what that was. The third moment was when I went through a very difficult litigated divorce and realized that there has to be something better than this. But the final shift, that moment that you describe, took place when I went to hear a lecture about mediation. This was in 1980. And within 5 minutes, I knew that my life had changed.
What was it?
Yeah,
What was the thing that within 5 minutes, like what grabbed you so much that you thought, this is it, this is the future for me?
I realized that while mediation is described as being neutral, it actually has an underlying set of values.
Yeah.
And those values were everything that I fought for during that time that I was a lawyer for equality, for peace, for freedom of speech, for all of those things that I value. All of those took place in mediation. And I realized kind of suddenly that the reason that the law couldn't, except accidentally, do anything that was just was because it is fundamentally a zero-sum game. Somebody has to win and somebody has to lose. And the idea that both people could win suddenly just hit me as being much closer to an idea of what is really just than the idea of somebody's truth being discounted and disregarded.
Yeah, I sometimes try to do like a mild evaluation of cases where I basically say, look, this is a coin toss process in the sense that, it's binomial. You've been given advice that you have a strong case, so have they. That's why you're in court. And someone is going to
Yeah,
find out that the advice that they got had limitations. They're going to, in a common law jurisdiction, they're going to find precedent could jump on top of them, and they could find that their super case is suddenly expensively very wrong. And yeah, it's a curious thing, but I kind of try and gently dent the confidence rather than pushing, too hard at it. And justice. What does justice mean to you, and how do you get it from
yeah.
mediation but not from a court process?
Well, having gone back and looked at this somewhat
Yeah.
carefully, I had to first go back to Aristotle. And
Okay.
Aristotle has two definitions of justice.
Yeah.
The first is what he calls due proportion. So, too much punishment isn't just, not enough punishment isn't just. Too much reward isn't just, too little reward isn't just. So, justice is what he calls due proportion. But
Mhm.
then the question is, how do you get to due proportion? And what Aristotle says is that, and I quote here, justice is someone else's self-interest.
Uh-huh.
Only I think the truth is it is the creative combination of our self-interest and someone else's self-interest. So, sorry about that. There's a little construction going on here.
Sure.
Um, so, I don't know if you're familiar with Mary Parker Follett.
The
She
organizational theorist.
Yes,
Yeah.
she wrote in the 1910s and
Yeah.
1920s. And what she wrote was that justice is integrative. Uh, and the basic idea is how do you take opposites and integrate them?
Okay.
So we start with the idea that instead of uh, trying to decide between opposites, we have to discover what they have in common, what they share, what the real differences are between them, and how to try to bridge those differences through some kind of synergy, some kind of synthesis, some kind of brand new emergent phenomenon. So that's what I think we're looking for in mediation, something that doesn't even begin to appear until both people have an opportunity to talk about what's really troubling them, until the mediator is able to get beneath the surface of what's troubling them, to discover the non-binary, non-digital interests underneath. And then the synthesis becomes much easier.
So you're talking about Uri and Fisher effectively interest-based
Yeah,
negotiations rather than negotiations based on the imposition of rights or unilateral imposition of power, that sort of thing, because they tend to produce zero-sum games. So
yes,
in the compromise, in the tension that's created by parties considering their interests and having to identify alignment with the help of a mediator and then understanding what they're actually opposed to, what on a values
sure.
basis, then you get this kind of thesis and antithesis, which produces this the synthesis of the resolution in whatever form it takes. Is that kind of
Yeah, that's a really nice way of putting it.
okay?
There's here's another way of thinking of it, which
Yeah.
is much kind of on a practical level. What really does the mediator do? And of course, part of what we do is we ask questions.
Hmm.
So Freud once described psychoanalysis as the listening cure. I think of us as being the question asking cure. Um, and so then the question is, let's take your audience here today. There are three categories of questions I can ask the members of your audience, anyone listening. And in any group generally, I can ask three categories of questions.
Yeah.
Category one, who is the oldest person in the group? Who's the youngest? Who's the tallest? Who's the shortest?
Yeah.
Who lives the closest to sort of
We'll
Trinity
say
College?
Dublin or something. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and who lives the furthest away? And notice that for everybody answering the question, there is a single correct answer for everyone.
Yeah.
There's only one oldest and one youngest and one tallest and one shortest and one closest and one furthest away. So that's category one. And notice also that all of those questions arrange themselves naturally in a hierarchy. So you can say youngest is best, oldest is best, but you can get from best to worst quite easily. Second category of question, how old are you? How tall are you? Where do you live? And notice now, there isn't a single correct answer for everyone. There's a single correct answer for each person. And this is the shift from power to law, or from power to rights. These are the kinds of questions that are asked in courts. Where were you on the night of October the 21st? Answer yes or no types of questions. And those are digital, yes or no answers.
Mhm.
But between yes and no, there are lots of maybes. And so here's category three.
Yeah.
What issues are you facing at whatever age you're at? What does your height mean to you? What did it mean to you growing up? What do you love about where you live? What do you not love about where you live? And the whole idea now of there being correct and incorrect answers has disappeared. The correct answer is the one that has meaning to you, and that can change from one moment to the next.
Mhm.
So what we are looking at is multiple truths. And now let's go back to digital or to binary. The simplest version of binary for you as an engineer is 0 and 1. So if I ask the question, how many numbers are there between 0 and 1?
Well, if we're allowing for real numbers, I'm going to give an infinite amount of numbers, and then we'll
Exactly
start talking
correct.
about Cantor and stuff like that, and degrees of
Yeah,
infinity, and yeah.
exactly right. And so not only do we have an infinite number, the Aleph set
Yeah.
from Cantor, but we have orders of infinity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So now, how many? Let's take sort of what something like what a marriage means. Well, it can mean one thing to one person and another thing to another. And how many versions are there in between?
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, there are an infinite number. And so what we can see is these are much more interesting questions to ask.
Yeah.
These are the interest-based questions because they draw us naturally into something in which the truth doesn't proceed from some external scientific validation.
Yeah.
And even within mathematics and number theory, it is possible to come up with multiple correct answers to the same question. So if I ask the question, what is the square root of 16?
Yeah. Well, I'll say I'll say 4, but I'll also argue that if you multiply -4 by -4, you'll get 16 as well. And those are
Correct.
the two roots and whatever. I studied maths. Before I became an engineer, I was a pure
Ah,
math student or whatever. So that's my
great,
uh,
great. So
that's my
this is
background.
perfect.
So, but in reading your book, in reading a book on mediation, I did not expect a book on mediation to start tackling pure maths, dimensionality, and stuff like that. That was a surprise. So I guess, for example, I think of like Abbott's Flatland, and for some people that's it's a story about dimensions, but actually it's an allegorical tale and a satirical tale. And the allegory in Flatland is that you have a square that's only existed in like a two-dimensional landscape and it doesn't know the world beyond it. It meets a sphere. When the sphere is trying to explain, I'm a sphere, and it's like, but I'm a square, right? And you're trying to tell me you're a sphere, and I don't get it. But sometimes you're a big circle, and other times you're a small circle. There's something weird about you. I think you're a funky circle. I'm not sure that you're an actual sphere. And eventually, over many, many years, I think it's millennia, the sphere impresses upon the square that it's something bigger, and there's a third dimension. And then this really interesting thing happens, which is the key allegory in it for me. The square has a dream, and it goes, you know what? There could be a fourth dimension there. And the square tries
Yeah.
to tell the sphere, right? And the sphere has been coaching it to understand about a third dimension, and the sphere goes, nah, you're kidding me. There's no such thing. And 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 this is a fundamental difference, I think, in the allegory because it was a satirical story about its time. I think it might have been Victorian morals and stuff like that, but
Yeah.
ultimately, yeah. But one of the points it's trying to make is the opened mind will be able to conceive of higher dimensions, but the sphere remains closed, even though it taught the square the lesson. And I think that is like, it was a fundamentally interesting thing. I remember when I was introduced to this story as a young mathematics student, because it appealed on a pure maths level, but also it appealed in terms of the humanity of the story and the lesson that it was actually teaching us. So I suppose, yeah, I thought it was really interesting when I saw your book coming from like lots of different angles, different sorts of metaphors. So, for example, like I think I read that you'd put like quicksand and dance and various other things into an AI to see how it would, like ChatGPT, to see how it would help, let's say, understand or mediate these metaphors to clients or readers. I mean, do you think that metaphor is like kind of like the bedrock of how we communicate in mediation?
Yeah. Well, I would say that metaphor is it's like a tool that allows us to dig in a kind of archaeological way to discover what's beneath the surface. So the metaphor takes place in the language of the subconscious.
Okay.
And what is communicated through metaphor is something deeper, which is about feeling what something feels like, what it seems like. And that is very useful for us. So, for example, we can describe conflict as, we won
Yeah.
in a conflict, which is a kind of military metaphor.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we could also describe it as a journey. We can describe it as an opportunity. We can use metaphors of various types. And then also as mediators, we can flip the metaphor. So if somebody says, for example, I feel trapped in this relationship. As a mediator, I can say, well, let's open up some topics for us to look at so that we can see off into the distance what you might like to explore in this relationship, all of which are metaphors designed to say, to reverse the idea of being trapped.
So we
So that you're
reframe.
now, yeah,
Yeah.
it's a reframe
Yeah.
using the metaphor. But because it takes place all at the level of the metaphor, it's much more powerful because it addresses the feeling rather than just the fact.
So it's almost like a command of metaphors. It's a bit like a kind of Rosetta Stone
Yeah,
in order to enable us
very
to
nice.
like to bridge gaps between people that may have very different cultural, ethnic, social, economic backgrounds to ourselves. But so long as we can actually keep these understand and recognize the metaphors and use them, then we can connect with them in some way. We can get our message across. Is that the takeaway or
Yeah, I think that's the first takeaway,
okay?
is that we can communicate and get our message across. The second takeaway is that we can actually help to transform, meaning change the form of the conflict for the person by shifting the metaphor or reversing the metaphor. So if we go back to culture and what you were describing as culture as being a part of this and the metaphors that arise out of culture, what is it that culture actually does? And I think that what it does is it helps us attribute meaning. So it tells us what things mean in a very simple and direct way, sometimes through stories, sometimes just through the use of a particular kind of metaphor. But what this means is that the mediator can ask the question, what does that mean to you? Or even interest-based questions that have to do with the process, like what role would you like me to play in this conversation? What kind of conversation would you like to have? What would it feel like if you were going to have the kind of conversation you want to have? Or also, when I do family mediations, I'll usually start with 4 questions.
Okay.
Often, I won't say always, but often this is the way I will start. Question 1, what words would you use, each of you in the family, use to describe the kind of family you most want to belong to? The kind of family you most want to have.
Wow.
And most want here is permission to go deep. So somebody says, I want a family that's respectful. Guess what? That one feels disrespected. Somebody says, I want a family that's loving. That one feels unloved. I want a family that's caring. That one feels uncared for. Second question, does anybody disagree with any of those words? Well, who doesn't want a family that's respectful or loving or caring? Everybody does. So nobody ever disagrees. Question 3, are each of you prepared right now in this conversation to begin living up to those words, to make the conversation that we are having right now respectful and loving and caring? Are you willing to do that? And they'll all say yes. And finally, question 4, do each of us have permission in this conversation to stop the conversation if we begin moving away from those words? And they'll all say yes. And now we're in a totally different space.
So you've primed them to
Yeah.
actually to have a heart-based conversation about the things that they
Yeah.
actually desire, where they were
If
not.
I can,
Yeah,
if I can put it a little differently, they primed themselves.
sure.
I helped them find the primes and then to agree with them, reach
Okay.
consensus on them, and agree to act on them. Yeah, but you're right. That's exactly, it's priming.
Yeah, and in a sense, it's like taking someone into a different space, a different room, a comfortable one where they can imagine that the world is going to be better. It's like the best therapy room or something like that, which creates a sense of ease and calm, and that creates like the possibility of imagining better. I find often in my mediation practice, people they've gotten so caught up, inured to what feels like a struggle, be it
Yeah.
in a workplace disagreement, a family disagreement, long-term probate, business stakeholder. Life has just become grim in a way, and the color's been taken out of it, if I could use a metaphor.
Yeah.
And and what we kind of try to do is get them to imagine a more colorful life again. So you set them at ease, and then you get them to think like, I get like little exercises like, write about what a good day could be.
Mm,
That sort of thing. I mean, is that
right.
when you refer to the magic in mediation, is this part of the magic?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So I like to think of it this way, that conflict has a kind of dark hypnotic power.
Sure.
Um, and it comes from a very simple definition of conflict,
Yeah.
which is a state of being stuck. And if you're feeling stuck, you're going to sooner or later get exhausted because everything that you try to do to get unstuck fails. And the reason it fails is because of the nature of the conflict. That is why it becomes a conflict for you in the first place. And this is what I wrote about in the book, The Crossroads of Conflict. There are two groups of people we can say that do not experience conflicts of a particular kind. I'm just going to mention two, but we can easily imagine an infinite number.
Okay.
First group, there are no 2-year-olds who experience conflicts over romantic love
Yeah.
because they're not ready yet. And number two, there are no 60-year-olds who experience conflicts with their parents over curfew. Why? Because they've already figured out how to solve that problem. So what are conflicts? And the answer is every conflict, without exception, takes place at a crossroads, defined on the one hand by a problem you are now required to solve, and on the other hand by the fact that you do not yet have the skills you need in order to solve it.
Okay.
So every conflict is an invitation to evolution, to learning, to discovering a new set of skills that are going to allow you now not so much to resolve the conflict as to outgrow it.
Okay. So it's like a Zen teacher that arrives when you need to learn the lesson and disappears when the lesson is learned.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfectly right. So nobody on this call gets into conflicts with other children on the playground over who gets to play with the toys.
Okay.
Why? Because we've figured out what to do if that happens. We know words to use. We know attitudes to bring. We know conversations that it's possible to have and succeed at. And the same goes for every type of conflict throughout our lives. The curfew conflict is one we have all been through, or other types of conflicts with our parents, in which we individuated and became ourselves through conflict. So that way of seeing it actually is profoundly transformative, because then what we can see is the real thing that people are asking for is not just a kind of settlement of the issues that they're arguing over, but some way of handling this kind of dispute that will prevent them from feeling stuck in the future.
So like a template for how to cope
Yeah,
with this sort of
yeah.
dispute.
Or
Yeah.
or an algorithm if you are mathematical.
Yeah. Well, I sometimes come back to like software, and I think of like the capability maturity model. So it's like, a process starts off as initial, and then if you figure out how to do it again, it's repeatable. And then if you figure out what you did, it's defined. And then if you can, if you could actually figure out how you could do it reliably, then it's managed. And then if you figure out how to improve it, like lean manufacturing and all that sort of thing, it's optimized. But an awful lot of things in our life are at the initial barely repeatable phase, right? And it's like, and we hope we never see those things again, because it's like I barely struggled with that the first time. So, you had a great there are many great paragraphs in the book, but one that I thought was really interesting in the
Actually,
sense
before
of,
you
go on
just
ahead.
before you go on,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
just want to say that was brilliant, Shane. That was really brilliant, and I think it would be great if you could take that and actually write it up. That is a kind of template, what you just described, and the
Yeah,
stages of it
yeah,
is just a perfect template for how we can then take the resolution process and
yeah.
break it into pieces. Because every step that you described, I think, is analogous to what we do in conflict resolution. I think that's just absolutely brilliant. Go
Oh,
for
thank you
it.
very much.
Write it up.
It's all in my head, and I've been teaching mediators for a long time, and I tell them about these things, and also the OODA loop, John Boyd's, observe, orient, decide, act, and stuff like that. And I try to, I try to set, I suppose, the context for mediation, in the sense of this is another set of decision making processes that we all go through, and that we have to help the clients make decisions as best as they possibly can. But we also need to be aware that we as mediators are constantly trying to deal with the context of what's happening. And one of the things that you said in the book, I thought it was really profound, and it's like one of the more insightful, profound, and lesser known secrets of conflict is that we choose our opponents precisely so they will help us discover our authentic selves. That we externalize our own internal conflicts, attribute them to others, and then do battle with them to discover how we think or feel, and in the process seek a place of integration and balance. This is every client who's walked in the door, right? And yeah, it's amazing, because it's this thing in human nature we don't seem to be aware of. It's like, we're not explicitly aware of, but when it's laid out like that, you go, of course, this makes so much sense. It's been known as a psychological theory in terms of projection and everything for like so long. And yet people in school, we're not given the skills, I think, to understand ourselves, um, as part of the education system. And sometimes even as mediators, I think we're not given the skills to actually understand ourselves. And then we maybe learn about it in the process of mediating with other people. Is that something you found, or?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I find it, just as you said, in every mediation that I do, probably the place where I see it most clearly is in conflicts between kids and their parents.
Okay.
And I've done lots of those kinds of issues, but also sometimes in marital mediations, where the one that the teenager is fighting against isn't the parent; it's the voice of the parent inside of them,
Yeah.
and they need to find their own voice. But the only way they can do that is by silencing that other voice that is so powerful. The more powerful it is, the more it has to be silenced in order to find your own.
And then,
And in
and some
marriage,
people,
yeah,
yeah, like some people really find it difficult to individuate from,
yes,
yeah,
yeah. And so now we're looking at systems.
yeah.
So in a family system, we have two forces, individuation and integration.
Hmm.
And now what we have to do is to find how to integrate and individuate at the same time. Too much individuation, the family is gone. Too much integration, the individual is gone. And so what we're searching for is a balance, but it's a razor's edge problem, as Somerset Maugham wrote. You can't find a stable point of balance. It is constantly in motion. It is a dynamical system, and therefore prone to chaos. And what we are looking for are ways of finding the deterministic element in the chaos, if I can put it that way. That's a mathematical shorthand.
Yeah.
But basically what we're looking for is how to, if I can put it in Zen terms, be the balance. Not just think about it, not just strive for it, but to actually have it be a part of who you are. I worked many years ago with a man, a really interesting Austrian cyberneticist, physicist, mathematical physicist originally. His name is Heinz von Forster, and I quote him in the book. And one of the things that I learned from him is about what he developed, which is in the field of cybernetics. He developed something called second order cybernetics, which is the cybernetics of cybernetics.
Okay.
If I can put it there. Okay, but now let's think about it in terms of the mediation of mediation.
Yeah.
Let's think of it in terms of values. So we can see that actually not just second order, we can see a third order. So the first order of values is a particular value. The second order of values is the value of having values. And the third order of values is being the value, the thing that you value, so that it ceased to exist as an independent thing. It has become a part of who you are. And I think this is what happens to us as mediators.
Okay.
We become the mediation. It becomes a part of us. It makes us better human beings.
Just like unconsciously competent.
Yeah.
Time in a sense. So we're embodying the skills. Okay, that's.
Unconsciously competent is great. Really great expression.
Well, that's pedagogical theory. So I suppose that's one of the key concepts that I learned from your books is the concept of omnipartiality. So, for the audience, would you be able to explain that in?
Sure. So it starts with an understanding that there's a problem with neutrality.
Yeah.
In mediation, and neutrality comes out of the law where it makes sense, because if you have a judge and you are in a landlord-tenant dispute, you don't want your judge, if you're a tenant, to be a landlord, or if you're a landlord to be a tenant, because the assumption is you will understand one side and one side only. And because of the fact that the judge can only decide in favor of one party or the other, the judge has a kind of power. And that power has to have not only a lack of prejudice or bias, but the appearance of a lack of bias in order to be able to be acceptable to people who are about to lose. But in conflict resolution, the mediator has no power. And so the difficulty is that neutrality has multiple connotations, one of which is a kind of distance between yourself and the people in front of you. And I know this distance quite well because I still work as an arbitrator, which is a kind of judge. And when I am in the presence of people who are adjudicating in front of me as the arbitrator, I distance myself from both of them. But in mediation, I do the opposite. And the secret to it comes out of Fisher and Urey, getting to yes.
Okay.
Be soft on the person and hard on the problem.
Yeah.
But that means being soft on both people, meaning being omnipartial to them as human beings, as you would to your child, even if you don't agree with what your child has done.
So is this one
So
of these like embodied skills that we can develop?
yes, yes, absolutely. And if we can't develop it, it means that our capacity for empathy is limited. So empathy is the specific form of that partiality, which is the capacity to discover the other within the self, not as an other, but as in Martin Buber's phrase, a thou. In
Okay.
other words, as a uh, uh, a friend, as a beloved, as a potential partner in the work that you are doing. So to find the other one inside the self means also potentially to place yourself at the foot of a bridge that connects the other with the other. And then what we can figure out is what does that bridge actually consist of? What is a question that I could ask that might allow them each to have some sense of what the other is feeling? So here's an example. I conducted a series of dialogues for Mediators Beyond Borders that you mentioned earlier in Greece between immigrants and Greek citizens who were opposed to immigration. And the question was, how do we begin these dialogues in a way that allows people to talk to one another? Because these are people who genuinely hate each other and are scared to death of each other. And so we started with these two questions. Question one, each person to answer individually. Question one, have you ever in your life, in a family or a neighborhood or a school or a workplace, have you ever been the new one? And everybody else has been there for a long time. What did that feel like? How were you treated? What happened? And question two, have you ever in a family or a neighborhood or school or workplace been the one who's been there for a while and now these new people are coming in and changing everything? What did that feel like? How were you treated? What happened, etc. And so everybody, and then the third question is, why did we ask those first two questions?
Yeah,
So
very good.
everybody gets it. Yeah,
So that to me reminds me a bit of Richard Schwartz's internal family systems,
exactly.
where what you're trying to do is you're seeing that there's a protector, there's like a fear-driven protector, and that's the root of a lot of prejudice because people feel that something of theirs is going to be impacted, taken away. It's very often it's not something concrete. It's just an imagined thing, but then it takes over neurophysiologically, and they kind of get caught up in it, and so what he tries to do in that therapy modality is like just get people to step back so they can kind of discover self. So that sort of question is, from my view, you're trying to get the person into a state of self, and you're also trying to get them to discover, I think, the empathy that they have if they could tap into it, if they could get, let's say, the fear-based response to step aside just for a short period of time. Is that kind of the okay? And
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And internal family system has an enormous amount of value for mediators.
yeah.
And we can easily ask questions like, I understand that a part of you is very upset over what happened. Is there also a part of you that could understand how upset the other person is? So those kinds of questions could be very useful. But in addition to that, there is just fundamentally something that we all do in every mediation, which is we listen to people tell stories about their conflicts. And in the Dance of Opposites, I wrote a chapter which is called The Narrative Structure of Conflict Stories. But part of what every story does is it elicits empathy. And we begin to identify with the princess or the wicked witch or the hero or whoever it might happen to be. And out of that, those archetypes comes some deeper understanding, which we can then begin to discover as obstacles, perhaps, or also as kind of gateways into a different level of awareness. So yes, yeah, go ahead.
You talk a lot about um, I think the need for mediators, but the need for everybody to read as voraciously as they possibly can, because it's an exercise where we have to create worlds in our minds, but we have to put ourselves in the shoes of imaginary characters in strange situations. So it's like an empathy developing process. Is that a fair comment, or is it?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think that part of what's missing is we think of empathy as being almost exclusively emotional,
Okay.
but there is um, also a kind of physical empathy, which we can find through what are called mirror neurons that respond within the body to what we see around us in terms of physical movement. There's even for people who are have been paralyzed since birth. If they watch someone playing a tennis match, the
Mhm.
parts of their brain that are responsible for those tennis movements fire, even though physically they have never been able to perform that movement themselves.
Wow.
And yeah, it's pretty amazing. But we can also see it mentally. So if I read, for example, Hegel's Science of Logic, which is right over here,
Yeah.
um, then I start to think in terms as Hegel thinks. Um, and then when I read Schopenhauer, I begin to think as Schopenhauer thinks or as Aristotle thinks. And then what I have to do is, in the course of doing that, I have to remember that it's also necessary, that's why it's omnipartial, to be partial to myself and return to my own outside voice. And now to go inside and outside and inside and outside is a part of what creates the bridge that we are looking for between us.
Do you find that sometimes good mediators are somewhat emotionally porous, but they need to work on the um, maybe some
Yeah,
self-protection, like, mindfulness or meditation or something like that? Is that?
absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
I would say not only emotionally porous, that's a very nice way of putting it. Um, the way that it might be put in the US would be boundary problems or
Okay.
uh, attachment disorder or any number of different ways of describing it. But the important part of that you're saying, and or even in conflict resolution terms, is conflict avoidant.
Yeah.
And a lot of people become mediators because conflict is upsetting to them. I'm one of those people. Um, and so what I had to do initially was to get to a place where, and it was helpful, of course, to have grown up in the 1960s to be able to do this, where I could see conflict as having something positive about it, as containing some deep and important truth. That until it is heard and acknowledged is going to drive that conflict. And so part of what we're doing is we're just struggling, kind of back to your idea of struggle, and searching everywhere we can to get a sense of what that is for each individual person. And the difficulty is they're not inclined to tell us. Um, on some level, they are engaged in conflict hoarding. And now we have to think about what they get as a result of doing that, um, and how we might encourage them to reveal this deeper, um, how would I say it? Well, we can say deeper desire, deeper
Okay.
need, deeper interest, something along that line. But I think that um, a great deal of it has to do with the um, um, I'll just say it in terms of sort of the attitudes that we develop over a period of time as a result of having come out of our families of origin,
Yeah.
having had the experiences that we've had in the culture that we grew up in, having had the relationships with our friends and loved ones that we have had.
I sometimes feel that mediation can be a little bit of a compulsive act in the sense that you're almost how do you say you look at conflict, you want to stamp it out. You but you don't necessarily phrase it that way, but there's kind of an internal discomfort there, and then you learn a whole set of tools and skills that enable you to actually help people overcome conflict. And then you think, oh God, there's so many people suffering from conflict, and you have to spread it broader, wider, like um, MBBI, is that part of you, Ken Cloke, saying I need to actually have like a broader impact in reducing conflict all around the world, and this is how I'm going to do it? Is that it, or?
Yeah, yeah, I would say that is it. Only it is now it in spades today.
Okay.
We all know that we are in deep trouble on a global level. We've now got a war in Iran,
Yeah.
and we've got additionally wars in Ukraine, in Middle East, in Sudan, to some extent in Congo and Rwanda, various other places. And of course, in Ireland, you've had experience
Yeah.
with this kind of protracted warfare
Yeah.
and what it does to people, what it does to language, what it does to culture, what it does to relationships, what it does to our attitudes towards conflict in general. Um, and I think this positions Ireland in a very nice way to have something specific and concrete and constructive to say to people in the Middle East, for example. So right now, just earlier today, I'm emailing back and forth to a group of Muslim mediators in Jerusalem and a group of Jewish mediators who are involved in various cities in Israel, bringing them together for a joint training in how to work together to do conflict resolution in Israel and in the Palestinian territories sometime in the fall, probably in October. And I think that what we have to see is that, and this came to me as a result of actually several years of being in Mediators Beyond Borders, the idea that conflict has no borders. It's kind of like ecology or climate change. It doesn't respect national boundaries.
No.
And my favorite statement about this came from the cellist Pablo Casals,
Oh yeah.
who was quite wonderful, who said, in quotes, love of one's country is a beautiful thing, but why should it stop at the border?
Yeah. I read a great an interesting, let's say, alternative to patriotism, matriotism, love
Yes.
for Mother Earth beyond all things. And yeah, it's I- national, supranational conflicts they're quite bizarre because people get caught up in them, and patriotism can feel quite unifying, clarifying, but so the war state is attractive for politicians. Sometimes it sweeps a lot under the carpet, but behind it all, is suffering, struggle. There's a great poem by W.B. Yeats, an Irish airman foresees his death. I don't know if you probably know it, but those that
Yeah,
I guide I do not hate, those that I guard I do not love. My country is Kiltarnan cross, my countrymen Kiltarnan's poor. No likely end could bring them loss or leave them happier than before. And that's really, these are not about the individual does not want to die for these this type of conflict, but they get swept up in it. And I suppose in thinking about how do we stop conflict at that sort of scale? I mean, are there skills that you think the mediators of today should be taught to enable them to more effectively um, resolve conflict, both at small but also at large scale, at the national or supranational scale? What do you think?
yeah, really well put. I think that, well, this is part of the reason for the subtitle of the latest book that I wrote, which is about the search for scale-free practices. So we've got three fundamental scales: micro, meso, and macro. And the micro scale is most mediations,
Yeah,
which take place between individuals, um, co-workers, community members, parents and children, divorcing couples, whatever it may happen to be. And this is most of what we do as mediators.
yeah,
Second level, the mesoscale, is a little bit different, but there are some mediators who do work in this field, working with an entire school, with a community, doing what we call public policy mediation in the United States, or environmental mediation, and what I call large group, multi-stakeholder consensus building processes. And there's a chapter on that in that latest book that you mentioned. The large scale, the macro scale, is large corporations, large scale governments, entire nations, entire cultures. And we have almost no experience working at this level, but what we do know is that many of the skills that are successful in doing divorce mediations can also be used in working with teams, in working with communities, in working in environmental disputes, and the same goes with regard to large-scale disputes. So how exactly do these work? And I think here we have to introduce a new idea, which is comes from the field of sort of diplomacy and peace building,
mhm,
um, which is the kind of idea that there are different levels of diplomacy. And what we can see is that the first level is kind of between the heads of nation states. And then the second level is between the people who are many of the decision makers who are beneath that level, but they're still very high up in the government. The next level beneath that are thought leaders, members of civil society, people like yourself, Shane. And then there's other levels we can, and of course, some of this is a little bit artificial. But what we are really looking for is an approach to conflict resolution that works not only from the top down, but from the bottom up. And that means that we can begin to have an impact on what happens by, for example, organizing dialogues within local communities about issues that people disagree about.
okay,
And I worked many years ago with Jeffrey Corey and the peace process that was taking place, working with Catholic and Protestant communities to try to figure out and imagine how we might go about moving people in the direction of dialogue. And some of this can't happen at the level of just saying, okay, everybody show up tomorrow and we'll start the dialogue. Instead, we have to put years of effort into creating the feeling that somehow dialogue might be possible. We have to start maybe with dialogues in other areas, even over issues like process, over issues like what do things mean to people. I think of them as a kind of cultural dialogue or cross-cultural dialogue that we have many of in the United States because we have conflicts over race, gender, class, a series of different issues that are really quite divisive. So drawing people together and asking them questions that show them what they have in common and at the same time allow them to talk about what's different. Here's an example. I was asked to work with a very large university in the United States where the professors were being asked by a group of students, were being accused by a group of students of being stereotyping them by race. And the professors refused to enter into a dialogue with the students because they didn't want to be thought of as stereotyping. So I suggested to the university that they start instead with this question to the professors. Do you ever feel stereotyped by students? Of course they do, all the time. Every professor feels stereotyped by students. Would you like to talk about that to the students? Yes. How about if we create a general conversation about stereotyping? And then, of course, everybody says yes. And then we can move into the different kinds of stereotyping and what we might be able to do about them. So that's an illustration of a scale-free practice, one that can be moved up the scale, not without modification and adaptation, because there are things that work differently on different scales. But it's an example of how to do this, and political dialogues are fundamental to that. So I've written a short piece, which is on the internet in various forms, which is called 50 Questions to Ask in Political Arguments.
Okay.
And here's question 1. What life experiences have you had that have led you to feel so passionately about this issue? And that's not a political speech or an invitation to a political speech. It's a question about who you are, about what's happened to you, about how it felt. And that's a different kind of conversation, and it doesn't have to have a yes or no answer.
Well, it's like
And then
Christopher Moore talks about like value, the
yes,
relationship, data, structural, and then values. And when I think about values, I think about, well, I'm not going to get one party to convince the other to abandon their values. I'm hoping for some transcendent moment where they agree to disagree, or they actually come to a sense of respect that for diversity of values and opinions. And I often hope that maybe this was something that could be coached or taught in schools rather than a thing that we have to learn as we go through life and butt up against someone with different values to ourselves, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it needs to be taught in schools. And at the same time, Oscar Wilde was absolutely correct where he said that anything truly worth learning can't be taught, which doesn't mean it can't be learned. It means we have to learn it. We can't just accept it. We need to actually learn it, come to terms with it. And it's possible to do a great deal of learning the scales, learning the fundamentals of a musical instrument, but to actually play beautifully is something that we have to discover within ourselves.
With some struggle along the way.
With a great deal of struggle along the way.
10,000 hours at least. At least.
Yeah, so, and we put that in.
Yeah. So I'm going to have to draw this interview to a close. It has been absolutely fabulous to talk to you, Ken, and to get the benefit of your wisdom. on the topic of conflict resolution, but also on so many other topics tonight. It's been great.
Me too.
So thank you very much.
My pleasure, Shane. Thank you. Really enjoyable.
Thank you.